Alright, let's learn some JavaScript. So, what is the difference between JavaScript and Java? They sound very similar, right? And a lot of people mix them up. So JavaScript is all about adding things to websites. It's to make your website a little bit more fancy. The syntax is also a little bit similar or simpler, and you can find the use cases for it right off the bat. Java, however, which is what we learned last summer in 2018, is more for building general purpose programs like games like Minecraft was that game was built in Java. It has very complicated and sort of annoying syntax that you have to get used to, and but eventually Java will become a good baseline for learning other coding languages. So I highly encourage you to learn both. Alright, let's get into JavaScript though. So how do you actually code? Well, you need two things. First, you need a text editor, what we call an IDE, or Interactive Development Environment, as well as something to run your code, what we call a compiler. Now, there are compilers and IDEs that you can download, but there will be a website that we will be using called playcode.io that works as a text editor and a compiler. So, why don't we actually open it up and check it out? So this is what playcode.io looks like. What you can do is click the sign in button at the top right, and then continue with Google. I'm going to use the 1UP Coding email. Alright, I'm now connected under the 1UP Coding email. So this is what your project interface looks like, or your text editor. This is your IDE. And it also will show you the compiled code. So right off the bat, go ahead and delete this code, and we will work with it later. This is the JavaScript file we are working with inside of our project directory. This is called our project directory. It contains all the files we need to code. If you ever want to save, go ahead and click save. You can title it, and you can also create a new project. Let's get back into JavaScript. So what is coding all about? Coding is all about variables. Now, what are variables? Variables are just ways we store data. They're like cabinets. A cabinet has can store something inside, and also has a label. And we use that label to access the cabinet. Now, variables can store different types of data, like numbers, characters, strings, which are just characters connected to each other, like words or phrases, and also booleans, which are just true or false. Now, how do we actually create a variable? Well, there are two ways, and we're going to use one of them for the rest of the lesson until we learn about the second one. Var and let. We're going to use let from now on. Now, either of them will help you create a variable. And then in this example, we get to see how. You start off by typing out let into your code. Then you type the name of the variable you want, or the label of the cabinet. Then you type an equal sign, and then the value you want it to have. Now, variable names are how we are going to access the data inside of the cabinet later on. So we want to make variables that are useful and descriptive. Yeah, we want to pick names that are useful and descriptive. Variable names cannot have spaces. And we also end the line with a semicolon to indicate the end of the statement. However, because JavaScript is so flexible, you don't necessarily need the semicolon. Why don't we try this out? Let's create a variable, let, by saying let, and then we're going to type in the name of our variable. We're going to call it age. And then set that equal to, and then type in your age, as well as a semicolon. You just created your first variable. It's called age, and it has the value of 17. Now, how do you change a variable? What if you want to remove what's inside of your cabinet and put something else inside instead? Now, you can do that by typing the name of your variable, another equal sign, and then the new value you want inside. You can also create variables without values by entering a semicolon or typing a semicolon right after the variable name. Then you can give the variable a value later on once you want to assign it a value. As you can see, you can also do some math before you put the number inside of the variable. Let's try this out. My age is 17. Now I want my age to be 18 a year later. Now one thing you want to avoid is creating two variables with the same name. You'll notice you cause an error in the console. Now the console is just the way our computer talks back to us. If everything goes well, then it won't give us anything. But if something goes wrong, it'll tell us what's wrong. And you'll see that age has been declared twice, has already been declared, because now you have two different cabinets with the same name. If you told your computer, hey, find the value inside the cabinet called age, then it won't know which cabinet to go into. When you say let, you're creating a new cabinet. When you don't say let and just say the variable name, you're using the already created cabinet. And again, you can create a variable that's a very poor variable name, but don't worry. And then once you type in a semicolon, now your variable has no value. It has nothing inside. Not a zero, not false. It has nothing. Then later on, I'm going to rename this variable to NA. Later on, you can give that variable or that cabinet a value. You can put something inside of the empty cabinet. Now what if you want to see what's inside of your variable? In JavaScript, we call this logging to the console. And we do that by typing console.log or console.log. And then we write parentheses. Now whatever we write inside of the parentheses gets logged to the console. Now the console or the log, when you type in console.log, it will take whatever you put inside the parentheses, turn it into a string, and then spit it to the console. Logging or console logging is very important to debug your code, to find out where your code went wrong by checking what your variable looks like at every step. Let's try this. We can type in console.log 15 and you'll get the number. Oh, first let's get rid of this error. Delete this line. Alright, now it printed 15. You can also type in a number, 15, and it will print 15, this time as a number. You can do some addition before you type numbers in. You can also log variables, such as age or NA. Now one weird thing to note is if you create a variable with no value, such as I'm going to name this variable unknown and not give it a value, once you log it to the screen, it gives you the value undefined. Now here are some tips and tricks with JavaScript. There are different ways you can change a variable, and rather than reading off of this slide, I'll show you. Let's create a variable called age and then set it to 10. You can either increase the age. Let's say you want to increase age by 2, so you want it to be 12. There are different ways you can do this. You can either say age equals 12, or you can say age equals age plus 2. This takes age, which is 10, adds 2 to it, and then puts it inside of age again. You can say age plus equal to, or if you want to increase age by 1, you can say age plus plus. This is called incrementing. It increases age by 2, or by 1. Now, let's check on age at all steps of the way. I'm going to type in this line, copy it, and then paste it after every statement. And you'll notice in the log, or in the console, age increases by 2, It starts at 10, increases by 2, increases by 2, increases by 2, and then increments by 1. This also works with subtraction and multiplication. Age minus equals 2, age times equal 2, age divided by equal 2, and to decrement age, as in decrease it by 1, you can type in age minus minus. You can also add strings together. So let's type in, we're going to create a variable called first name. Type in your first name. And then we're also going to create a variable called last name. Type in your last name. Now we're going to create one more third variable called full name, and then set it equal to first name plus last name. And you'll notice if we log this to the console, we get the two strings stuck together, one attached to the other. Now what if you want to add a space between the two names? You can simply type in space here, and then stick it right after first name, and then stick last name right after that. Now you have Luke, a space stuck to it, and then a Ren stuck to it. Bam. You can also type in you can also add in more names, or you can also add in more strings in the similar way that you can also add to a string, like how you can add to a number in this way. Here, let me show you what I mean. You can let full name, or sorry, you don't need to write let. You can you can type in full name and then add Ren to it. And then if we log this to the console, you see that Ren is stuck to it once more. One of the things you have to worry about as a coder is making your code consistent, concise, and clear. There aren't exactly rules on how you can do this, but there are several conventions you can follow to follow this standard. Now, rather than reading out a bunch of text, let me show you. Typically, in coding, when we type in strings, we use double quotes, just like here. Also, when you type in characters, you type in single quotes. Now this standard is different for everyone, and it's totally up to you whether or not you want to follow it. Your code will work either way, or most of the time at least. Almost all of the time. You typically want to add in semicolons at the end of your lines, even though your code will work fine without it. It simply makes your code more clean and consistent. Now, naming your variables is totally up to you. You can name them something completely wacky. But if you want to follow a certain convention, you typically want to name them a certain way. Say if you want two words in a variable name, like first and name, you add an underscore in between. Some people also capitalize the first letter of every word after the first word. Now, both of these totally work, but it's your job to stay consistent. If you start doing it one way, continue following that rule for every other way, and don't just stop it there. Now, before I move on and finish up this lesson, I will go over 2 or 3 more things. I've already shown you 2 ways to create variables, let and var. And they work very similarly. But there's one more way I want to show you, and it's called const. If you want to create a variable that shouldn't be changed, as in if you try to change it later on, it won't work. So if you want to create a variable that stays the same value and won't let you edit it later, you can use const instead. As you see, if I try to change it, it gives me an error. And then lastly, but almost more importantly, one way to make your code more clean is to use comments. Now, what are comments? If you type in 2 backslashes, you can write anything on this line and it won't affect your code. It won't give you errors. Now, usually you use comments to explain the function of your code. Say over here, if I type in a comment, I can say create first and last name, then stick them together. And that explains what my code does. Now, if you want to create multiple comments, you could type in the backslash, or sorry, this is the backslash, it's under the quotation mark, star, type in some stuff, and then end it by typing star backslash. Now you can say this is a multi-line comment. And none of this will affect your code. Also, if you want to store code away without losing it completely, you can select some code and then type in control backslash. It comments out all of that code, making it so that it doesn't affect your code. Now, this is useful if you want to store a bunch of code and not include it in your project, but you don't want to delete it completely, just in case you want to reuse it later. So why don't we review? What is JavaScript? It's a web development language. It helps you build websites with cool different functions, and it's also very different from Java. JavaScript is all about variables, and variables are like cabinets. You give them variable names, and you also, or labels, and you also use let and var to create them, or you can use const. Now you can give them a value when you first create them, or you don't have to give them a value, and then you can change the value later by using the variable name. We can log all of our variables or anything we want to the console using console.log. Now this gives us extra information on our code in case we want to help fix it. There are also different ways to change our variables, such as incrementing or adding by a certain value, or decreasing by a certain value. And there are several conventions that we should follow to make our code clean, concise, and consistent. Now why don't we get some practice? I don't feel the need to read all of these out, but go ahead and pause and then try them out yourself. Now I'm going to assume that you already paused, or this is your last chance to pause. I'm going to try all of these now. So we're going to create a variable for our name, age, favorite letter of the alphabet, and whether or not the sky is blue. We're also going to name these variables so that it's easy for us to tell what they are, and then log them all. Then I'm going to try adding variables of different types, and then seeing what happens when we log them to the console. And also, here's a weird one. What is the weirdest thing we can log? Can we log empty variables? We tried that earlier. But also, can you add to an empty variable and then log that? So I'm going to delete all this code, or actually I'm going to title this lesson 1 and then save it. Oh, it glitched out. Alright, we're just going to use this. So we're going to create variables for our name, Luke Wren, our age, 17, our favorite letter, I think my favorite, I don't know what my favorite letter is. We're gonna try X. And then, is sky blue? And that's true. Or most of the time. Or in where I live, at least. And then we're gonna log all of these. Console.log name. I'm gonna print this 4 times. Or copy and paste it 4 times. I'm gonna do age. I'm gonna do favorite letter. And then we're gonna do is sky blue. Alright, easy enough. Now we're going to try adding these together and then logging them to the console. Or console.log name plus age. What if we try attaching a number to a string? You'll notice you get the string converted to it, or the number converted to a string and then stuck onto the end of the name. Now if we try favorite letter, that also makes sense as well. You get the character stuck at the end of the name. Now we're going to try is sky blue, a Boolean value. And you'll notice it converts true to a string and then sticks it at the end of the name. Now let's try a couple of other things. Age plus is sky blue. And you'll notice the weird thing is you would think that it would be 17 and then true stuck to it, like this. But in fact, it's 18. And the thing is, what JavaScript does is it converts true into a 1 and then adds it to age. So that's 18. Now, if is sky blue was false, it would add 0. So JavaScript thinks that true is 1 and that false is 0 when adding variables like that. That's crazy. What about... Oh, I can't. What about favorite letter? And then is sky blue. You get X true. Makes sense. So, this is cool and all, but now here's the ultimate test. What if we try to have a variable without any value? No value. What if we add this to different numbers, or different variables, and then see what we can log to the console? So let's try adding name plus no value. And you'll notice that you get Luke Wren and then undefined stuck at the end of it. What about age plus no value? Oh, we get some kind of error, NaN. It seems like our code doesn't know how to compute this. So it doesn't know how to add 17 to undefined. What about favorite letter? Alright, we get X undefined. And then the last one is sky blue. NaN. So we know now that we don't know, or the compiler doesn't know how to add true to an unknown value or 17 to an unknown value. That's crazy. And let's just try logging no value again, and we'll get undefined. So that wraps up lesson 1. Thank you guys for watching. I hope the end really tested your brain and showed you how complex and weird coding can get. So I hope to see you guys in the next video, and keep on coding.